I opened the evidence fridge and saw my family's surname on the blood bag. When I called my mother, she said some truths were meant to stay dead. For a long second I just stood there, half bent, the cold air from the open door spilling around my hands and creeping up my sleeves. The small bulb inside the fridge buzzed softly, casting a pale yellow glow over rows of plastic tubes, sealed envelopes, and the single unit of dark red that had my name written across its label in neat black ink. Hale. Same spelling. Same simple, stubborn letters that had been stamped on every school form, every court document, every report I had ever signed as a detective. There are plenty of Hales in the world, I told myself, but not many in our small town. I stared at that label until the letters stopped looking like a word at all and turned into shapes. My breath fogged in the cold air, and somewhere behind me the evidence room clock ticked in slow, indifferent beats. I stepped back, shut the fridge door with a soft thud, and pulled my phone from my pocket. My fingers were clumsy on the screen. I scrolled to the contact that still said Mom, even though I had not called her nearly as often as I should have. When she answered, her voice was warm but wary, like it always was when she saw the station number on caller identification. Before I could even say hello properly, I asked her the question that had lodged itself in my throat. Mom, I said, does anyone in our family have blood stored in the hospital here? Any reason I would see our name on an evidence bag? There was a pause on the line, not long in real time, but stretched by the weight of everything neither of us had ever said. When she finally spoke, her voice was lower, more fragile, and carrying something I could not place yet. Some truths were meant to stay dead, she said softly. Then she hung up. I stood there with the phone pressed to my ear, listening to a dial tone that felt more accusing than any judge I had ever stood in front of. I had been a detective in this town for a long time, long enough to see families break under the strain of secrets and the light of truth. I had told other people over and over that truth was always better, always cleaner, no matter how much it hurt. Now my own mother was telling me that some was meant to stay buried with the bodies we put in the ground. It was almost enough to make me laugh, except there was nothing funny about the way my hands were shaking. Our town is the kind of place most people only see through a car window on their way somewhere else. A single main street lined with brick storefronts, a handful of traffic lights that seem to stay red longer than they should, a diner where the coffee is weak but the pie is decent, and a river that wraps around the edge like a lazy brown belt. Mornings smell like wet pavement and wood smoke. Nights are so quiet that you can hear train whistles from the next county if the wind is right. It is not the sort of place where you expect your own name to turn up in a murder investigation, especially not on a bag of blood in the police department's evidence fridge. I had been on the force here since I was barely out of my 20s. I was technically retired now, at least on paper, but the town is small and the department smaller, and when something bad happens, they still call me. They call me because I know the back roads and the family trees, because I remember who fought with who in school, and who never really forgave who for what happened in the parking lot after the homecoming game. They call me because I have seen the worst of what people can do, and I have not run away from it yet. That week, the bad thing had a name and a face and a life, and her name was Claire Stanton. Claire was a nurse at our little hospital, the same one whose basement held the fridge I had just opened. She was in her early 30s, with hair she wore pinned up in a neat twist, and a laugh the orderlies said you could hear halfway down the corridor. She worked the evening shift mostly, the one that catches the car wrecks after dark and the bar fights once the beer runs low. Patients remembered her, and not just because she was easy on the eyes. She had a way of listening that made people feel less alone under the harsh fluorescent lights. Her co-workers said she was always picking up extra shifts, saving money for something big. A trip to the coast, maybe. A house. A future. She did not make it to any of those things. One cloudy afternoon, an orderly went to check on the supply closet near the back of the emergency department. The door was stuck. He shoved, muttered under his breath, and pushed harder. When it finally gave way, something heavy shifted on the other side and nearly toppled onto him. It was Claire. She was on the floor, half-curled, hair tangled, eyes open but empty. There were bruises on her arms and marks on her neck that told a story before the pathologist ever saw her. The paramedics tried anyway, because that is what they do, even when there is nothing left to save. The emergency department staff who had worked alongside her the night before stood in a shocked cluster by the nurse's station. Someone cried into their hands. Someone else threw up in a trash can and kept saying her name over and over, like that might rewind the last few hours. I got the call at home. The chief's voice was tight, the way it gets when he is trying to sound calm and not quite managing. "Elias," he said, "we have got a body at the hospital. It is Claire from the ward. We're going to need you on this." I pulled on the same jacket I had worn for a decade of other scenes, grabbed my notebook and my badge out of habit, and drove to the hospital with the stale taste of old coffee still clinging to my tongue. In a town like ours, the hospital is the closest thing we have to a fortress, a place where people go to be mended, not murdered. The fact that someone had turned a supply closet into a grave made everyone's skin crawl. The scene inside the closet was cramped and sad. Boxes of gloves and gowns stacked along one wall, disinfectant bottles on a metal shelf, and Claire on the rough linoleum in the middle of it all. There were signs of a struggle, but not much blood. Whoever did this had used their hands more than anything else. There was a faint chemical smell in the air, something sterile and sharp. I crouched as far as I could in that small space, looking at every scrap of dirt, every scuff on the baseboard. We found a partial boot print on the inside of the door, like someone had braced their foot while holding it closed. We found a few dark hairs that did not match Claire's blonde. We bagged everything, because if experience has taught me anything, it is that justice often comes down to what you can fit into a plastic envelope. The hospital security cameras gave us a timeline. Claire finished her shift late. She was seen heading toward the supply closets, probably to restock for the night staff. A few minutes later, a tall figure in scrubs walked down the same corridor. The video was grainy, the angle bad, the camera old and slightly tilted, the way all hospital cameras seemed to be. The face was turned away. The gait was casual, almost bored. No one on the ward admitted to recognizing the walk, which either meant the killer was clever or someone was lying to my face. Both possibilities made my teeth clench. We sent everything we had to the state lab. Swabs from under Claire's nails. Fibers from her uniform. Those dark hairs. The lab folks speak in cautious phrases, but everyone in this business hopes for the same thing now when a body comes in under suspicious circumstances. A clean genetic profile, something we can put into the system and hope that it pings against an old record or a prison sample or anything at all that can give us a name. Most of the time, nothing comes back. The void just echoes. In Claire's case, we got something different. The report came in on a gray morning a few days later. I sat at my desk by the window, the file open in front of me, watching raindrops chase each other down the glass as I turned the pages. The lab had managed to pull a solid genetic profile from the skin cells under Claire's fingernails. That was good news. The bad news was that it did not match anyone in the state's offender database. No easy answer. But tucked in the middle of the report was a small note that made my heart skip. The lab had run the genetic information through another system, a quieter one, the kind used to look for partial matches between unknown samples and people who had submitted their genetic information for medical reasons or family tracing. They had found something that suggested a close relative, not a stranger. The wording was precise and careful, high probability of a first-degree relationship. Parent, sibling, child. The name attached to the reference sample was Hale. I read that line 3 times. Hale, my own last name, printed in a lab technician's tidy handwriting, under a heading that might as well have said family. The first name on the report was not mine, though. It was Jonah Hale. For a moment, I thought it was a coincidence, some stranger with my surname who happened to share enough genetic markers to make the computers sit up and take notice. Then the past reached out and tapped me on the shoulder. Jonah, a name I had not said out loud in years. A name my mother never said at all. I had an older brother once. He was a ghost long before I ever put on a badge. I knew him as stories more than as a person. I was very young when he died, which is how the story has always gone. Drowned in the river, my father drunk and my mother frantic on the shore while the searchers dragged the muddy water. They never found a body, or at least that is what my child mind remembers. Just people shaking their heads, and our house filling up with casseroles and condolences. After that, Jonah became a photograph on the mantle, a boy inside a frame, forever frozen at an age I grew past. My mother took the picture down when I was in high school and packed it away. She said it hurt too much to look at. My father took to the bottle more fiercely, then to the grave a few years after that. It was just me and Mom left, and between the two of us, we decided, without ever really saying it, that the past was a place we were not going to visit. Yet here was the name again in a lab report, tied to blood that matched the genetic profile of whoever had fought with Claire in that narrow closet. I went to the hospital myself to ask about the reference sample. The doctor in charge of the blood bank looked tired in the way medical people do, their faces lined by long nights and fluorescent lighting. She pulled a folder from a drawer and leafed through it. "Here," she said. "The sample was taken years ago as part of a research study on congenital heart defects. Most of those were destroyed when the grant ended, but a few ended up in long-term storage, in case they were ever needed for follow-up. We sent over one unit that matched the identifier the lab gave us." She shrugged. "I did not look at the name, detective. Just the number." Back at the station, I fetched the key to the evidence room from the sergeant's desk and went down the narrow hall to the back. The evidence room is a cramped, chilly space lined with shelves that sag under the weight of cardboard boxes. The refrigerator hums in the corner, an old medical unit with a temperamental door and a strip of duct tape across the handle where the plastic cracked years ago. I opened it and saw the rows of clear bags hanging on their hooks, each labeled with case numbers, dates, and names. My eyes slid over them out of habit, until one label snagged my attention like a hook. "Hail, Jonah." I could almost feel my stomach drop through the floor. That was when I made the call to my mother, and she told me that some truths were meant to stay dead. I did not accept that. I could not. Not as a son, not as a detective, not as a man who had spent a lifetime telling other families that hiding from the truth would not bring their loved ones back. I signed the log sheet, closed the fridge, and drove straight to the small house on the edge of town where my mother still lived. The sky had cleared by then, leaving the street damp and shining. Her front yard was the same as always, a patch of grass with stubborn dandelions, flower beds too tidy not to show how she spent her lonely afternoons. Her car sat in the driveway, its paint faded, the bumper held together with tape. She met me at the door before I could knock, as if she had been standing on the other side the whole time. She looked smaller than I remembered, her shoulders rounded, gray hair pulled back into a loose bun. Her eyes, though, were as sharp as ever. She did not invite me in right away. She just looked at me, at the badge on my belt, at the tightness in my jaw. "You saw it," she said. It was not a question. "I saw his name," I replied. "On an evidence bag." "Mom, what is going on?" She stepped back then, opened the door wide, and gestured me inside. The house smelled like coffee and furniture polish, familiar and strange all at once. The living room had not changed since my father died. Same sagging couch. Same floral curtains. The only thing missing was the photograph of Jonah that had once stood on the mantel. She had not found a new picture to replace it with. She had just left the space empty. We sat at the small kitchen table, the one where she used to help me with homework and where my father used to count out his crumpled pay in the evenings. She poured coffee into 2 chipped mugs, her hands steady enough, even though I could see the faint tremor in her fingers. For a while we just sat there, listening to the ticking of the clock on the wall and the distant sound of a lawnmower somewhere down the street. "Your brother did not drown," she said at last. The words fell like stones into a pond, sending ripples through everything I thought I knew. "That is where this starts." I set my cup down carefully. "Then where did he go?" She stared at the table as she spoke. "When Jonah was a teenager, he started getting into trouble. Fights. Drinking. Running with boys your father called bad news. I was always trying to pull him back. Your father was always threatening to throw him out. It was a bad time. Money was tight. Your father had just been laid off. Tempers were short. I thought it would pass." She closed her eyes briefly. "I was wrong. She told me about a girl from the next town over. Her name was Maria, and she worked at the diner off the highway. Jonah spent more and more evenings there, nursing cheap coffee and watching her wipe down the counter. They started seeing each other, quietly, because Maria's family was strict and did not like the idea of their daughter running around with a hale boy from our side of the river. There were arguments. There were threats. One night, things went too far. According to my mother, Jonah came home late one summer evening, his clothes dirty, eyes wild. There was blood on his shirt. At first she thought it was his, that he had been in another fight. But when she checked, he was unhurt. "It is not mine," he said. "It is hers." He told them a story in pieces, between sobs and bursts of anger. He and Maria had argued by the river. She had said she wanted to leave town, go somewhere else, start over. She wanted him to come with her, but she wanted him to leave behind the drinking, the petty crime, the boys he ran with. He had laughed in her face. She had shoved him. He had shoved her back, harder than he meant to. There was a slip of wet grass, a scream, a splash. And then silence. My father had gone out in the dark with a flashlight, stomping down to the riverbank to look for any sign of the girl. My mother stayed behind with Jonah, watching him pace and mutter and claw at his hair. When my father came back, his expression was hard in a way she said she had never seen before. "There is nothing," he told her. "No body, no footprints. But there are tire tracks on the road. Maybe someone saw, maybe someone stopped. Maybe they took her. Maybe she walked away. We do not know. They made a choice that night, the kind of choice that splits a life in two. They chose not to call the police. They chose to believe, or pretend to believe, that someone else would find the girl, that maybe it was not as bad as it seemed, that Jonah did not need to have his future stamped with one terrible mistake. They told themselves there was no proof, no body, no crime they could be sure of. They told the neighbors that Jonah had run away the next day. And then, when rumors about a girl gone missing started swirling, they agreed on a story about their own son. A story about a boy who had drowned in the river. Grief is easier for people to handle than suspicion. A funeral is easier to plan than a trial. I listened, my throat tight. "So there was never a search?" I asked. "No report." "There were searches," she said. "For the girl. People looked. But it rained for days after that night. The river rose. If she was there, the water took her somewhere else. Her family never filed missing person reports with our department. They thought she had run away with some boy from out of town. They did not know it was our boy. They did not know he came home." "What about the blood?" I asked. "The sample in the hospital?" She took a shaky breath. "A few months after that, Jonah collapsed at work. Chest pains. They rushed him to the hospital. The doctors thought it might be something with his heart. They took blood for tests. I remember signing forms, not really reading them. I was just glad he was alive. The tests came back fine. They said he had anxiety, maybe. They gave him pills. We brought him home. And then not long after, things got worse. He started talking like someone was watching him, like the river was going to come into the house at night and drag him out of bed. Your father could not stand it. One day Jonah was gone. This time he did not come back. You never looked for him?" My voice cracked more than I wanted it to. "My boy," she said, and there was a fierce pain in the way she said it. "I have been looking for him in my sleep for decades. But in daylight, in this town, we told people he had drowned. It was simpler. It was kinder, in a way, than saying he walked out because he could not carry what he had done. We thought, if he is alive somewhere, he has a chance to start over. If he is dead, then the story is not wrong exactly. Either way, your father did not want the law involved. He said one ruined life was enough." She met my eyes then. "We were wrong. I know that now. We should have told someone. We should have told you." I thought about the genetic report. The partial match between the unknown profile under Claire's nails and the old sample labeled with Jonah's name. If Jonah was alive somewhere out there, then the person who killed Claire might be his child. A niece or nephew I never knew I had. A branch of our family tree that had grown in the dark, watered by secrets and silence. "Mom," I said slowly, "the blood from Claire's case matches that old sample. Whoever put their hands on her is closely related to Jonah. This is not just about the past anymore. It is happening now." She shook her head, tears shining in her eyes. "Some truths were meant to stay dead," she whispered again. "We tried so hard to bury it. Your father took it to his grave. I thought if we never spoke his name again, it would be like it never happened. Now you are telling me it has come back around." "Truth does that," I said quietly. "It circles. It waits. It finds a way out." I left her house with more questions than answers, but I had one thing I had not had before, a direction. The lab report had given us a surname and a likely connection. My mother's story had given that connection flesh and bones. Somewhere out there, a child of my lost brother had grown up without him, carrying his blood, his name maybe, and enough of his features to fool a security camera. And that person had been inside our hospital, in scrubs, close enough to Claire to leave skin under her nails. We started digging. Birth records, school records, old employment files. I could not put my own surname into the search without raising eyebrows, so I worked sideways, asking the younger officers to help, saying we were chasing down an old lead on a different case. We found a few people named Hale in the surrounding counties, but most were distant cousins or farmers with no reason to walk the hospital corridors after midnight. Then one file caught my eye. A nurse named Leah Hale, hired at the hospital 3 years earlier, left 2 years after that. Dark hair. Early 20s when she started. Her address at the time had been in the next town over, the same place Maria had been from all those years ago. I remembered a woman at the hospital telling me that Claire had been mentoring a new hire, Someone who left under a cloud of whispers after some controlled substances went missing from the drug cabinet. No charges were ever filed, but rumor in a small town sticks harder than any label. Leah had left. Claire had stayed. If Leah was Jonah's daughter, then she might have grown up hearing whatever twisted version of the story he chose to tell her. She might have grown up with a chip on her shoulder the size of an entire town. We pulled old security footage from the time Leah had worked there. Same corridor. Same tilt on the camera. Same height and build as the figure we saw trailing Claire toward the supply closet the night she died. I felt my stomach go cold. It is a strange thing, recognizing family in the blurred stride of a stranger. Finding Leah was not hard. She had not run far. People like us rarely do. She rented a room above a bar in the next town over, the same town where my brother had once hung around a diner, watching a girl named Maria wipe down the counter. Life has a cruel sense of symmetry. We went with a small team, no sirens, no fuss. I did not tell them why my hands were colder than usual on the steering wheel. I just said this was someone we needed to talk to in connection with Claire's death. When she opened the door, it was like looking at a photograph of my brother that had been left in the sun too long. The same dark eyes, the same stubborn jaw, but there was something of Maria in her too, a softness around the mouth, a tilt of the head. She frowned when she saw the badges, then smiled a little when she saw me. "I knew you would find me eventually," she said. "Uncle." The word hit me harder than any fist. We took her in, sat her in an interview room with the dull gray walls and the camera eye in the corner. She talked in circles at first, like she had rehearsed this in her head 100 times. She knew about Jonah. She knew about Maria. She knew about the river and the night and the choice my parents made. She knew about me, the brother who stayed and became a cop, the brother who believed in rules and order, and all the things her father swore were stacked against him. She knew everything except how to stop the anger that had grown in her like a weed. I asked her about Claire. At first she denied everything, but when we showed her the lab results and the security footage, something in her cracked. She said Claire had recognized her when she came back to the hospital months after quitting. She said Claire had called her by name in the corridor, asked her how she was doing, said she looked too thin, offered to help. Claire had been kind, too kind maybe, and Leah had read that kindness as pity, as judgment, as one more Stanton, one more good employee, looking down at the girl who had slipped pills into her pocket to sell on the side. The argument had started as words. It had ended with hands. "I did not mean to kill her," Leah said, eyes red, voice hoarse. "I just wanted her to stop telling me I could do better, like she knew anything about my life." I pushed. She fell. By the time I realized how still she was, it was too late. She looked at me then, her chin trembling. "Maybe it is in the blood," she whispered. "The pushing. The river. The hands. Maybe some things do not wash out." I thought about my mother's words, about truths meant to stay dead. I thought about all the years she had spent pretending there was no Jonah to be found, no girl in the river, no child left behind to grow up with his anger. I thought about the blood bag in the fridge, my family name written in neat black letters, connecting all of us across time and violence. We charged Leah with manslaughter. The prosecutors talked about intent and impulse, about mitigating factors and harsh realities. The court wanted a storyline that fit into legal definitions. I could not give them the whole of it, the river and the diner and the night my parents chose silence. I gave them enough. Leah went to prison. Claire's family got the brittle comfort of a conviction. My mother sat in the back of the courtroom every day, hands knotted in her lap, eyes on the floor. She never looked at Leah directly. I do not know if she saw Jonah when she did. People still ask me now and then if that case feels like justice. I tell them the truth as best I can. Justice is a crooked line. It bends around things we do not want to face. It passes through hospitals and kitchens and riverbanks. It does not always end where we think it should. I opened an evidence fridge and saw my surname on a blood bag, and that simple act pulled me backward through decades of lies and forward into a new kind of grief. I still visit my mother on Sundays. We sit at the same kitchen table and drink coffee that is too strong. We do not talk much about Jonah. We do not talk much about Leah. But sometimes, when the conversation runs out and the silence stretches, I see her glance toward the mantel, toward the empty space where a photograph used to be. I know what she is thinking. If she had told the truth back then, would things be different now? Would a girl named Maria still be alive? Would a nurse named Claire still be stocking a supply closet, humming under her breath? Would a young woman with dark eyes be working a night shift somewhere, tired but free? I do not have answers for her. All I have are the same lessons I have carried through every case I have ever worked. The dead do not stay quiet forever. Blood remembers, even when we try to forget. And when you open the wrong door, whether it is a supply closet or an evidence fridge or the locked room of a family secret, you had better be ready for what comes spilling out into the light.